LiberalViewer presents.
So even at the news conference announcing the capture of Boston bombing suspect Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, Fox News reporter Shepard Smith was already asking the question about whether the suspect would be informed of his Miranda rights, like the right to remain silent and to have an attorney present for questioning, as you can see in this clip.
Reports tonight are that there was no Miranda warning given, that they were claiming a public safety exemption. Could we get an explanation for that?
There is a public safety exemption in cases of national security and potential charges involving acts of terrorism. And so the government has that opportunity right now, though I believe that the suspect has been taken to a hospital.
Now, cable news discussion of the bombing suspect's Miranda rights didn't start with the capture of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, but even days before, when several news sources erroneously reported an unnamed suspect had been arrested in the bombing case, Fox News anchor and lawyer Megyn Kelly was already exploring whether the Obama administration would be soft on terrorism compared to the George W. Bush administration in her question to former Deputy Assistant Attorney General under Bush, Tom Dupre, that began with the huge understatement you can see in this clip.
President Bush wasn't known for extending a ton of constitutional rights to the terrorist suspects right after 2001. All right, so that's been documented. So while you were working for President Bush, what would you have recommended that we do? Should we Mirandize a suspect? Should we not? Should we wait a while? Should we send him down to Gitmo? What should we do?
Well, call me conservative, Megan. I guess I would be reluctant to Mirandize the guy right off the bat. We just don't know enough at this point. We're not 100% sure anyone's been arrested, but we also just don't know who this guy is, whether he was working alone. And I guess in a situation like this, my instinct would be to err on the side of caution and not Mirandize the guy unless and until we were confident that there was no imminent threat to public safety and that he was not affiliated with Al-Qaeda or other sort of international terrorist groups.
Now, that advice from the former Bush administration official that suspects can be questioned about imminent threats and terrorist affiliations is half right, as I'll get to in a moment, but he's entirely inaccurate in his reasoning for delaying the reading of Miranda rights that you can see here.
Well, the concern here, Megan, as you suggested, is that once you Mirandize the guy and put him in domestic, regular criminal proceedings, you're giving him a chance to lawyer up. And typically what that will mean is that he will refuse to cooperate, he will refuse to talk, he will refuse to share information.
Now, based on my years as a criminal defense attorney, it's just not true that suspects typically stop talking when read their Miranda rights, as I'll expand on in a moment, but first, it was really interesting to see CNN broadcasting at almost the exact same time a discussion of the exact same issue that made almost the exact opposite mistakes as the Fox News broadcast, as you can see in the conversation between Juliette Kayyem, Chris Como, and Anderson Cooper beginning in this clip.
Obviously, the person, if they have been arrested or when they are arrested, is read their Miranda rights, has the same rights as any other criminal defendant.
Right, this is good old-fashioned law enforcement, and it actually works in a lot of these cases.
Even though it's described as an act of terrorism, they still have all the same rights. We have
criminal terrorism
as everybody
statutes.
So the discussion on CNN failed to mention the public safety exception allowing questioning about imminent threats at all, but gave viewers more accurate information about the ability of law enforcement to successfully question suspects after giving them Miranda warnings in this clip.
He will be in law enforcement custody. There are a lot of ways to entice people to speak. There are a lot of ways to, if you actually have an individual, determine who he has been with or others he's been with.
Where that person lives, what their neighbors have seen, who came and went from the apartment,
and let's
phone
just say,
records.
this was not a suicide bomber, right? So this is a person with a lot of motives that might be able to be used by good law enforcement to get other information out. This is not someone who wanted to die for the cause. So that means there's sort of a weak link there.
It is very possible, and again, we don't want to go down the road of speculation, but it is very possible if this was done with some sort of political agenda, some sort of desire to make a statement, that person may very well want to continue to make a statement using their own words.
And that's a much more accurate description of the power of law enforcement to get suspects talking regardless of Miranda warnings, but the best coverage throughout the Boston bombing story came not from Fox News or CNN, which both reported that false story about a suspect in custody long before the actual capture, while the best coverage came from MSNBC and specifically NBC Justice correspondent Pete Williams, who not only kept MSNBC from reporting that false story about a suspect in custody, but the morning after the arrest of the actual suspect, Pete Williams expanded on the Obama administration's invocation of a public safety exception before giving Miranda warnings in this clip.
The government invoked that same rule in the case of the so-called underwear bomber, Umar Abdul-Muttalib. As in his case, it allows questioning to learn of any potential plots or accomplices that could present a continuing threat.
The first questions the FBI will focus on are specific threats that he might be aware of. Likely, are there any other improvised explosive devices? Were there other people working in the network? The sorts of things that go directly to whether or not there's a continuing threat to public safety.
And that's right. In 1984, the U.S. Supreme Court found a public safety exception allowing questioning before the Miranda warnings in a case in which the police were asking where to find a missing gun, and the Obama administration has used that exception for terrorism suspects like the 2009 failed Christmas Day bomber Umar Farouk Abdul-Muttalib, who was questioned for almost an hour before getting his Miranda warnings, and you can see a 12-page order from the judge in that case giving the legal reasoning justifying the use of the public safety exception here. More recently, however, the Obama administration has expanded the public safety exception to possibly allow questioning for a couple days on a much broader range of subjects, which not only threatens to violate the Constitution if those statements are later used in court, but isn't really necessary, as is evident from Pete Williams' answer to the question in this clip.
During this questioning process for the next 48 hours under this rule, he has no right to the Miranda right. Once he exercises his Miranda warning, though, once he exercises his Miranda rights, he has the choice to stop answering questions. But what the Justice Department says is most of people in these cases, surprisingly enough, continue to talk anyway.
And that's an important fact that matches my experience when I was a criminal defense attorney. Police are good at getting suspects to give up their rights and talk despite the Miranda warnings, and proof of that phenomenon came in a Ken Burns documentary coincidentally broadcast on PBS this week, reminding us of another horrific crime in which the police and media offered overwhelming evidence the suspects were guilty, including videotape confessions to the infamous 1989 Central Park jogger rape. But the 5 teens who were found guilty and served several years ended up being wrongly accused, and the documentary even provided the chilling footage of one of the wrongly accused getting his Miranda warnings right before giving his false confession, as you can see here.
I'd like to advise you of your rights with respect to statements you may make now, okay? You have the right to remain silent and to refuse to answer any questions. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Anything that you say can be used against you in court. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
You have the right to consult a lawyer now before any questioning and have a lawyer present during any questioning. Do you understand? Could you please answer out loud?
Yes.
If you have no lawyer or cannot afford a lawyer will be provided for you now, free of charge, before any questioning. Do you understand?
Thank you. Yes.
He actually thanked the DA for offering him an attorney and then went right on to make the false confession the interrogating detectives had coached him to make, and some of the kids even had their parents in the room with them, which the documentary addressed in this clip.
I want to warn you of your rights with respect to anything you say in this case.
Why would a parent not say at that moment, we want to consult with an attorney?
Anything that you say can be used.
The reason is because of the setting and because of the way they're being treated by the police and because of being overwhelmed by the situation, it doesn't even register in their minds.
And again, that's the really important fact getting lost in this debate about giving terrorism suspects the Miranda warnings. Suspects in custody are already at a huge power disadvantage, and the danger of coercive interrogations and false confessions is already very high, regardless of Miranda warnings, which is why the Obama administration's overbroad use of the public safety exception is so disheartening, I think. Never mind the Republican leaders advocating throwing out the right of suspects altogether, but I want to know what you think. Should terrorism suspects get Miranda warnings except for questions about imminent threats to public safety? And especially for those who watched the great Central Park 5 documentary, do protections for suspects in the American criminal justice system need to be weakened or strengthened?
YouTube, you decide.